They said she married up, that a nurse from East Fresno had no business tying herself to one of San Francisco's elite. So they made her prove her intentions, with ink on paper. Madison Ortega signed that prenup with her hands shaking and her pride buried under a dozen lawyer words she barely understood. Across the table, his mother, poised in a silk blazer and pearls, watched her like a courtroom witness, satisfied. She thought she won. But 3 months later, after Madison's father's funeral, when a man in a gray suit handed her a key to a safety deposit box, that smile, gone, just like her control. Funny how fast the powerful fall when truth does a knock. It kicks in the door. You think love is enough until it's measured against legacy. And sometimes the real inheritance isn't money, it's clarity. Stick around, because what happens next rewrites everything they thought they knew about her. Hit that like button, share if you've ever been underestimated, and subscribe, because this story, it's for every woman who's been told she's not enough. Let's begin. Madison Ortega is 31 years old, a registered nurse, and until recently, she thought she knew exactly who she was. She didn't grow up with silver spoons or ski trips to Aspen. Her dad worked maintenance at a local high school and never once called in sick. Her mother passed when she was 13, and since then, it was just her and him and her. He taught her how to sew a button, fix a leaky pipe, and never let anyone talk down to her, even when they wore a suit. She loved her life, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That's why, when she met Ethan Bradley during a night shift at Seattle General, she didn't think twice about his Rolex or the fact that his shoes probably cost more than her car. He brought her coffee the second night they worked together, and by the end of the week, she was laughing more than she had in months. He listened. He asked about her dad. He told her she made him feel grounded. And for a moment, she believed they came from different worlds, but were building the same one. It started on a Thursday night, cold trauma unit floors, code blue chaos, and Madison charting vitals when he walked in like calm after a storm. Dr. Ethan Bradley. Tall, crisp, the kind of man whose name sounds preloaded with privilege. She expected arrogance. What she got was a guy fumbling with his ID, asking if the vending machine took cards. She bought him a Snickers. He gave her a laugh she hadn't let out in weeks. That's how it began, over stale candy and terrible coffee. He told her his residency was ending, and he wasn't sure about following his family into private practice. She told him she was happy where she was, no beachfront property needed. They traded stories in that break room like secrets. And for once, Madison didn't feel the need to explain her background. He really listened, not waiting talk. That's dangerous, you know, when someone sees through your guard and doesn't flinch. He kept showing up, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with soup from that spot on Fifth she'd mentioned once. On-call became off-duty. After a double shift, he waited just to walk her to her car. Said the parking lot gave bad thriller vibes. She laughed the whole way home. 3 months in, he met her dad. They grilled carne asada under porch lights, drank beer. Afterward, her dad said, "He's smart, knows when to talk and when to shut up." That was rare praise from a man who rarely offered any. With Ethan, it felt steady, real, like maybe something good had finally stuck. And maybe love didn't have to be dramatic to be true. But storms don't always announce their return. Sometimes, they just pause, long enough for you to hope, before they flood everything you thought was safe. Meeting Ethan's family was like walking into a different climate, same state, different universe. His parents lived in Hillsborough, tucked behind iron gates and boxwood hedges taller than most of her neighbors' houses. Their home looked like something off the cover of an architecture magazine. High ceilings, limestone columns, and an entryway that echoed. Madison showed up with a bottle of wine. She spent 20 minutes choosing and a pie she baked that morning before her shift. His mother opened the door in heels and a cashmere shawl, blinking once at the pie before ushering her in with a tight-lipped smile. "You must be Madison. So good of you to come." That night, the chandelier above the dinner table sparkled like judgment. Madison sat across from Eleanor Bradley, former law professor at Stanford, who spoke with the ease of someone used to being listened to. She asked where Madison studied, and when she said Fresno State, She nodded politely like she'd just admitted to attending traffic school. Nursing, she repeated, drawing out the word like it had too many syllables. That must be very fulfilling. Do you work long hours? Her eyes flicked to Madison's hands, then back to her wine. Madison told her she loved what she did. That nothing beat holding someone's hand when they were at their lowest. Eleanor smiled thinly. That's lovely. Ethan always said he admired resilience. Her voice wrapped the compliment in velvet and razor blades. His father, George, was quieter, kind even asking about her patients, her shifts, but he glanced toward Eleanor after every question, like checking for approval. Ethan tried. Madison could see it. He bragged about her volunteer work, how she took on extra shifts during COVID, how patients remembered her name. But with every word he spoke, she felt the distance grow. Eleanor didn't hear devotion. She heard defense, and Madison realized something then. This wasn't dinner. This was court, and she was being cross-examined. By dessert, she'd memorized the shape of her spoon. She'd smiled through enough backhanded compliments to make her cheeks ache. When she offered to help clean up, Madison smiled, but something cold settled in her stomach. It wasn't that she didn't belong there. It's that they had already decided she never would. It happened on a Sunday morning in Half Moon Bay. The fog lifted off the ocean as they walked the trail near the cliffs. Ethan had been quiet, fidgeting with something in his pocket. Then he stopped, right where the trail curved, and got down on one knee, pulling out a ring that sparkled like it had something to prove. Madison Ortega, he said, voice shaking a little. You make me want to be better, smarter, more present. I don't want to imagine a life without you. Will you marry me? Madison said yes. Of course she said yes. They laughed, kissed, and hugged tight. He spun her around, and for one perfect second, the world shifted in the best way. They drove back to the city, his hand on hers the whole way, talking about telling their parents. Her heart was still racing when they pulled up to his parents' house. Eleanor answered the door. Before Ethan could even finish the word engaged, she interrupted. Well, I suppose we'll need to talk about a prenuptial agreement. No congratulations. No smile. Just that same lawyer's tone, like she was negotiating a merger. Ethan shifted beside Madison, his jaw tightening. Mom, can we at least enjoy the moment? She didn't blink. Of course, but we have to be realistic. Love is beautiful, but it doesn't negate responsibility. I'm sure Madison understands. She said it like handing Madison bitter tea and expecting her to sip politely. That night, around 10 p.m., Madison's phone rang. It was Eleanor. Madison, dear, she said, please don't take this personally. You know how much Ethan has built. Your background. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but we have to protect the life he's created. She never said it, but Madison heard it clear as glass. Daughter of a janitor, state school nurse, Latina. In Eleanor's world, that meant risk. Madison sat on her couch in her scrubs, staring at their engagement selfie. For the first time that night, she didn't feel like a fiancé. She felt like a transaction, like a threat to something she didn't even want a piece of. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and old money. Ethan barely spoke on the ride, just glanced at Madison, expecting her to bolt. She didn't. She showed up, smiled, and folded her hands neatly in her lap. Across the mahogany table sat Daniel Wexler, Eleanor's attorney, tailored suit, gold watch, the kind of man who probably charged by the breath. Miss Ortega, he began, I've been asked to walk you through the terms of the proposed agreement. Proposed. That word made Madison laugh a little inside. He opened a thick folder, reading like he'd done this 1,000 times. No joint ownership of premarital assets. No claim to family trusts. Spousal support capped at 2 years. Only if the marriage lasted at least 5. A modest life insurance payout in case of death, but no share of Ethan's estate. Then, the clause that hit Madison like a slap. Any behavior deemed damaging to the Bradley family's reputation meant forfeiting all benefits. Essentially, Wexler stated, this is standard for high-net-worth families. Nothing unusual. Ethan sat silently beside Madison, knee bouncing, hands clenched. He never looked at her. Madison turned to him. Is this what you want? He flinched. It's just paperwork, Mads. It's not about us. But it was. It was about exactly how they saw her, not as his partner, not as someone building a life with him, but as a potential liability, a risk to be managed, a name that didn't look right on paper. Madison stared at the pen for a long time. Then she signed it. She signed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. While Eleanor's lawyer watched like a chess player, Ethan exhaled as if Madison had done him a favor. Deep inside, something in her cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but clean, like glass under pressure. That night, home alone, Madison sat on her bathroom floor in the dark. Just her reflection, and a question echoing in her chest. What had she just agreed to? Why did it feel like she'd traded more than her name? She didn't know it then, but that signature didn't just protect their family. It would end up saving her. The morning after Madison signed that contract, she woke before the sun, her fingers stiff from holding the pen too tightly. Ethan slept beside her, arms slung over her waist as if nothing had changed. But it had. She stared at the ceiling, shadows crawling like quiet reminders. She'd done what they asked, smiled, agreed. And yet, she felt smaller than she had in years. They went on with wedding plans like nothing was broken. Ethan discussed flowers and seating charts. Madison nodded in the right places. But she couldn't stop thinking how quickly he'd left her to carry that weight alone. His silence in that office roared louder than any "I love you" ever could. 2 weeks later, Eleanor invited them to a private family dinner. Madison told Ethan she had a shift, but he insisted. "It's important to my mom," he said. They arrived at 7. Candlelight. A 4-course meal. Conversation about tax shelters and board appointments Madison knew nothing about. Eleanor glanced at her, smiling politely. "So, Madison, how's work? Still doing the overnight shifts?" Madison nodded. "Yep. Somebody's got to be there at 3 a.m. when the world decides to fall apart." Eleanor chuckled, barely. "Such noble work. Hard to keep that up once you're married, though. Have you thought about other options?" Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom." Eleanor raised a brow, simply saying it's not the easiest schedule for a wife, especially one married into a public-facing family. Madison looked at Ethan. He looked at his plate. She realized then, this wasn't a family she was joining. It was an institution, one that didn't want her for who she was, but what she could quietly become. After dessert, Eleanor pulled Madison aside. Her tone softened, but eyes were sharp. "You're a lovely girl, Madison. Ethan chose you, and that means something. But remember, not everything you've earned has to be fought for." Madison smiled, nodded, but inside she thought, funny. Everything I've ever earned was. That night, driving home, Ethan reached for her hand. She let him, but something had shifted between them, something he didn't feel yet, but she did. Trust doesn't snap. It erodes. And by the time you realize it's gone, there's nothing left to glue together. The call came just after midnight, the kind that slices through your sleep like glass. Madison knew something was wrong before she answered. Her dad's supervisor was on the other end, voice trembling. "Madison, it's your father. He collapsed during his shift. Paramedics took him to St. Mary's." She didn't even change out of her pajamas. Just grabbed her keys, wallet, and drove, barefoot in sneakers. The highway was empty, but her mind wasn't. She kept whispering, "Please hang on," over and over like a prayer she didn't remember how to finish. When she got to the ICU, he was already hooked up to a ventilator, machines humming in that awful, rhythmic way that tells you the body's here, but the man might not be. Madison sat by his bed for 3 days straight. Nurses she'd never met brought her coffee. A resident let her scrub in to help reposition him. Out of pity, probably. Ethan came the first day. He brought her a sandwich, rubbed her shoulders, stayed for a few hours. But by the second night, never let bills pile up or trash sit overnight. Seeing him, that still broke something in Madison she didn't know could break. It was early morning on the 3rd day when his fingers twitched. Madison grabbed his hand, leaned in close. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Baby girl, when this is over, go to the bank. Wells Fargo. Safety deposit. Code your birthday. It's all there. It's time." And he squeezed her hand once. 2 hours later, he was gone. The funeral was small, like he would have wanted. Just a few neighbors, some of his co-workers from the school, and a handful of her nursing friends. Ethan stood beside her in his black suit, looking like he belonged to another world entirely. She leaned into him out of habit, not comfort. After the service, Madison found herself staring at the envelope the funeral director handed her. His final arrangements, clean and precise, just like Dad. On top of it, taped carefully, was a sticky note. Don't be afraid of what you'll find. Just remember who you are. She didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But something deep in her bones told her everything was about to change. The bank was an old building downtown, the kind with marble floors and brass fixtures that smelled faintly of polish and time. The vault was colder than Madison expected, like the kind of cold that seeps through your skin and settles in your chest. The manager handed her a narrow metal box and stepped away with a nod. She placed it on the table, just stared at it for a moment. Her fingers hovered over the latch. "Code your birthday." She punched it in, hands trembling. The lock clicked. Inside wasn't money, at least not at first. It was documents, folders, photos, a letter sealed with her dad's initials. She pulled it out, unfolded it, and recognized his handwriting immediately. "Madison, if you're reading this, I've gone. And I'm sorry you're finding out this way, but I needed you to grow up strong, not spoiled. You were always the smartest person I knew. I didn't want money to get in the way of that. But now, you're ready. So here's the truth." Madison kept reading, breath catching in her throat. Her dad had started a medical logistics company in the early 90s. They specialized in emergency transport coordination, partnered with over 200 hospitals across the West Coast. Quietly, he'd built it, expanded it, and sold it in 2007 for over $400 million. But he didn't retire. He took the money, founded Unity Health Systems, a nonprofit network of urgent care clinics and free health education programs, all under a different name. He ran it from behind the scenes, using proxies, never once putting his face on anything. "I wore overalls to work, so you wouldn't think money made a man important. I wanted you to love people, not things." I hope I did that right. There were stock certificates, trust documents, ownership papers for 3 apartment complexes in Oakland, 2 medical buildings in Sacramento. Madison sat there, slowly piecing together a version of her father she'd never met. A man who'd quietly built an empire and never told a soul, least of all her. In the back of the box was a photo. Him shaking hands with the governor at a healthcare summit. Madison remembered that weekend. She thought he was in Reno fixing a friend's furnace. She laughed, and then she cried, hard and ugly, right there in the vault because she finally understood. He didn't hide his wealth out of shame. He hid it to protect her from becoming someone who measured herself by other people's yardsticks. And in doing so, he taught her the only lesson that ever really mattered. Know your worth, even when no one else sees it. Madison didn't tell Ethan right away. For days, she walked around with that secret like a fire in her pocket, burning but hers. She needed time to breathe, to feel what it meant. Not just the numbers, but the truth underneath them. The truth that she had never been less than not for one single second, and that all the dinners, the comments, the condescension, she'd survived them without ever needing what they thought they had. When she finally did speak, it was quiet. They were in the kitchen. He was making coffee. Madison placed the envelope from the lawyer on the counter. "What's this?" he asked, wiping his hands. "My father's estate," she said. "He left instructions. I went to the bank." He raised an eyebrow, slid the papers out, started reading, and stopped. His eyes scanned the page again. Slower this time. "Madison," he whispered, this can't be right." "It is." He blinked, reading the numbers aloud like they were in another language. Real estate assets, $3.2 million. Equity holdings, 10.6. Charitable trusts. Medical infrastructure. "My God, Mads, your dad." "He founded Unity Health Systems," she said. Silence. Then, "Your dad was Alfredo Ortega?" Madison nodded. His mouth opened, but no words came. And then he sat down, slowly, like his knees gave out. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to see who you'd be when you thought I had nothing." He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the weight of it land on him. All the dinners where she bit her tongue. All the moments he could have stood beside her, but stayed quiet instead. The next dinner at his parents' house came just a few days later. Madison wore the same dress she'd worn to their first dinner there. No jewelry, no fanfare, just her. They were halfway through the meal when Eleanor made another backhanded comment about knowing the value of a simple upbringing. Madison smiled politely, reached into her bag, and laid the folder gently on the table. "What's this?" Eleanor asked. "My family's assets," Madison replied. "You said understanding legacy was important." Eleanor flipped through it, her face draining of color. Her husband leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. Ethan just stared down at his plate, saying nothing. When she reached the page with Madison's father's photo, the heir left the room. You're his daughter?" Eleanor finally asked. "The very one," Madison said. "The janitor from East Fresno? Turns out he built something after all." And for the first time, Eleanor Bradley had no words. Only silence. And that silence? It was everything Madison had been waiting for. The drive home was silent. Ethan glanced at Madison, words rising then dying on his lips. She didn't rescue him. Not this time. He finally spoke as they parked. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Madison kept her eyes forward. Would it have changed anything? Maybe yes. We could have avoided all this. "All of what?" she asked, finally turning. "Your mother treating me like a threat? You sitting silent while she dissected my life with a smile? You letting me sign a document that called my love for you a risk?" He flinched. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." He lowered his voice. "You should have trusted me." That made Madison laugh, a bitter, breathless sound. "Trusted you?" "Ethan, I stood in a room where people saw me as a liability. You watched it happen, over and over, and said nothing. Not once." He raked his hands through his hair. "I didn't want to start a war. So you chose peace with them over dignity for me." The silence that followed said more than either of them could. Over the next few weeks, they tried to pretend. Wedding talk resumed, but it was hollow. Every touch, every "I love you," felt fake. Madison wondered if he loved the version of her he thought needed saving. Then one night, he came home with hope in his hands. "We'll void the prenup. Rewrite it. Equal terms." Madison looked at him. "Steady." "No. The paper told me everything I needed to know." She took off the ring, placed it in his palm. "It's not about money. It never was. It's about the man I thought would fight for me, and the man who watched me walk in alone." She didn't yell. She didn't slam the door. She just walked away. Because sometimes strength is quiet. And goodbye is the answer you give yourself. A year later, Madison stood outside a modest brick building in East Oakland, fingers brushing over the bronze letters etched above the entrance. The Alfredo Ortega Health Center. There were no cameras, no speeches, just folding chairs, home-cooked arroz con pollo, and the quiet hum of a neighborhood finally being seen. They offered everything her father believed people deserved. Free checkups, bilingual counselors, women's care, vaccinations. No one asked about insurance. That was the point. His foundation, now hers, funded 3 more clinics. They gave scholarships to first-gen nursing students, hired doctors who listened more than they prescribed, the kind who stayed past closing time. People asked if Madison still worked. She smiled, still wore scrubs, still held hands, still stayed late. The money didn't change her. It just let her become more of who she already was. And then there was Daniel. She met him in a grocery store checkout line. She was humming Sam Cooke, he noticed. He was a social worker, raised by his grandmother. Still drove the same beat-up Prius he had in college. He didn't ask what she had. He saw who she was. When he found out about the inheritance, he just said, "Good for you." But I fell for the woman who smiled at the cashier like she knew her whole story. They spent quiet nights on the porch, sipping tea, watching the skyline dim. One evening, Madison told him, "I still think about my dad. Every time a patient says thank you, it feels like he's standing right there." Daniel didn't reply. He just reached for her hand. Looking back now, Madison doesn't feel bitterness about that prenup. She kept it, not to resent, but to remember. It didn't protect anything. It revealed everything. If someone ever asks you to prove your worth, they've already decided you don't have it. But here's the truth. You don't need their approval. You need your own belief. That's where real wealth lies. And once you know that no contract, No silence. No last name can take it from you.